The year was 1816, an England draped in mourning black and silver, where every ballroom shimmered not with joy, but with the brittle brightness of denial. London's ton danced feverishly that winter, as though the death of Princess Charlotte, the nation's beloved, had left them desperate to forget grief in chandeliers and champagne. Beneath that veneer of gaiety moved Lady Eleanor Florence Harcourt, 21 years old, daughter of a viscount whose name had once commanded respect, and now invited pity. The night of her undoing began with candlelight and whispers. She stood at the edge of the Harcourt ballroom, a pale figure in lilac silk that seemed too hopeful for the hour. The orchestra tuned, the guests murmured, and she felt the air thicken with anticipation that was not for her. Her father, Viscount Harcourt, had promised that evening would restore their family's standing, an elegant affair to remind the ton that the Harcourts remained unbroken. Yet Eleanor, ever observant, saw the glances exchanged behind painted fans, the glint of knowing malice in the lady's eyes. When Sir Edmund Wareham approached, her heart fluttered with the fragile hope of safety. He had once pledged himself to her, before her father's fortune had begun its mysterious decline. Edmund's smile was measured now, his politeness too careful, his hand too cold when it brushed hers. They danced only once. During the second waltz, a messenger in the livery of Whitehall entered the hall and delivered a sealed letter to the Viscount. The music faltered. A moment later, a gasp cut through the perfumed thick air. The letter fell from her father's trembling hands. His face blanched, then reddened with shame. The word embezzlement passed from mouth to mouth like the hiss of a serpent. Funds intended for wounded soldiers, gone. The Harcourts ruined. Eleanor's world contracted to the rhythm of her own pulse as Edmund released her hand mid-dance, retreating as though from contagion. By midnight, the ballroom was nearly empty. The orchestra had ceased. Her father had vanished upstairs in disgrace. Eleanor remained near the window, unmoving, her reflection a ghost among shadows. The lilac silk clung damply to her skin where tears had fallen. Outside, snow drifted through the London fog, settling upon the cobblestones like the quiet judgment of heaven. In the days that followed, ruin came swiftly. The Viscount's creditors seized their estate, and the once bustling Harcourt household fell silent. Her father, overwhelmed by scandal and illness, took to his bed and never rose again. At the funeral, few dared attend. The ton's interest in tragedy rarely survived its novelty. By spring, Eleanor was left with a handful of books, a modest pension from a distant aunt, and a reputation too stained for any suitor to risk his name upon. It was then she turned to the only occupation left to a gentlewoman of ruined means, a governess. She found quiet dignity in the thought. Better the mind's labor than a heart's humiliation, she told herself as she packed her father's few surviving volumes, Shakespeare, Milton, and a dog-eared copy of Pope, into a worn valise. Each page had been her refuge as the drawing-rooms of London closed against her. Her journey from disgrace to survival was neither swift nor easy. For months she resided in a boarding house near Bloomsbury, teaching the daughters of merchants their letters and French verbs. She kept her chin lifted, her words measured, her manner self-effacing. If she was lonely, she did not speak of it. The mirror above her narrow bed reflected a young woman grown prematurely solemn, her beauty understated yet unyielding, a face that suggested intellect rather than flirtation, conviction rather than charm. Then, one March morning, as a gray drizzle shrouded the city, the post arrived. The letter bore a seal of black wax and an insignia she did not recognize, a rearing stallion encircled by ivy. The handwriting was firm, masculine, and elegant. "Miss Harcourt," it began. "I am informed of your skill in instruction and your impeccable conduct. My ward, Lady Isabella Cavendish, requires a governess of both education and discretion. Should you accept the position, your presence is requested at Somerset House within the fortnight. Your term shall be fair, your lodging comfortable. Discretion, however, is absolute. A.C*. The initials were unfamiliar, Yet something in the assuredness of the script stirred her curiosity. She inquired quietly among her few acquaintances and soon learned the truth. Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Ashbourne, hero of Waterloo, recluse and widower. A man whose face, they said, still bore the mark of war. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. A governess in the home of a duke was a rare position, respectable, well compensated, and, perhaps most importantly, far removed from London's vicious gossip. She accepted. The journey to Somerset House took 2 days. Her carriage rattled over rutted lanes bordered by budding hedgerows. The spring air smelled of thawing earth and distant rain. As the miles passed, she allowed herself to imagine peace. A quiet household, a child to teach, books to read by lamplight. No dances, no debts, no whispered scorn. When the carriage turned up the long gravel drive, she saw Somerset House emerge through the mist. A vast Georgian estate of pale stone, symmetrical and severe. Rows of windows gleamed like watchful eyes. Yet the grounds, though meticulously kept, carried a certain melancholy, as though joy had long since departed. The butler who greeted her was courteous but distant. "His Grace awaits you in the drawing-room," he intoned, leading her through echoing corridors scented faintly of lavender and smoke. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she entered. The Duke of Ashbourne stood before the hearth, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture soldierly yet weary. He turned as she curtsied, revealing a face both striking and shadowed, handsome, yes, but marked by a faint scar that crossed his left temple, a testament to battles past. His eyes, grey as storm clouds, studied her in silence. "You are Miss Harcourt," he said at last. His voice was deep, unhurried, touched by an accent of the north. "I trust your journey was tolerable." "Yes, your Grace." "Quite tolerable," she replied, though her gloved hands trembled slightly. He inclined his head. "My niece is 7. Quick-witted. Too quick, some would say. She has frightened off 3 governesses in as many months. You may consider that fair warning." "I have known children of spirited temperament," Eleanor said softly. "They are often those most in need of patience." A faint quirk of his mouth suggested amusement, or approval. "Then you may find employment here less intolerable than most." He dismissed her with a polite nod, yet, as she turned to leave, she felt his gaze linger, not with impropriety, but with an unreadable curiosity, as though he were weighing something unseen. That night, as Eleanor unpacked her meager belongings in the small yet comfortable chamber allotted to her, she listened to the rain striking the window-panes and wondered at the life that awaited her within these silent walls. Beneath the dignity of the household, there was a stillness that spoke not of peace, but of wounds yet unhealed. Before extinguishing her candle, she placed her father's old copy of Paradise Lost upon the bedside table. She traced a line with her fingertip. "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." She closed the book and lay awake for a long while, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere below, footsteps echoed, steady, deliberate, belonging, she knew, to the Duke himself. And though she could not yet name it, something in that measured tread stirred a faint tremor within her heart. Not fear, nor even curiosity, but the quietest, most perilous beginning of hope. Morning at Somerset House began not with laughter but with discipline. The corridors were already alive with the muted rhythm of servants polishing brass, the quiet thunder of distant hooves on gravel, the occasional echo of a child's voice, Lady Isabella's, carried down from the upper floors. Lady Eleanor Harcourt rose early, as she always had, and dressed with modest precision. Her gowns were plain but neatly pressed. Her hair, swept into a simple knot, caught the first streaks of light filtering through the tall windows. She reminded herself that humility was her armor, composure her only wealth. Her first morning in service to the Cavendish household began with apprehension. The Duke was not at breakfast, but his niece awaited her, small, golden-haired, sharp-eyed, with a posture too proud for her years. Isabella Cavendish greeted her governess with a curt nod and the unfiltered scrutiny of a child accustomed to command. "Are you the new one?" she asked, voice both curious and imperious. Eleanor smiled faintly. "It appears I am, my lady." "Then you'll leave by next month," Isabella declared, returning to her toast. "They all do." "Perhaps I shall surprise you," Eleanor said softly, pouring tea. The child looked up, caught by the quiet confidence in the statement. From that moment, a fragile accord began, born not of affection, but of mutual intrigue. As the days unfolded, Eleanor learned the rhythm of the house. Mornings devoted to lessons in history, language, and deportment, afternoons reserved for riding or walks in the garden, evenings spent in solitude, for the Duke dined late and privately. Somerset House was governed not merely by etiquette but by silence, thick, watchful silence that carried both authority and sorrow. The servants spoke little of their master, though fragments of rumor floated through the air like drifting embers. They said the Duke had lost both his wife and brother to the same fever that swept through London 3 winters past. They said the war had left him more scarred in soul than in flesh. Eleanor did not inquire. To pry into grief not freely offered felt indecent. Yet she felt his presence always, felt it in the hush that fell when his footsteps sounded in the corridor, in the faint tremor of respect or fear that accompanied the mere mention of his name. It was 3 days after her arrival that she first encountered him alone. The library, vast and dust-scented, had become her refuge. Isabella had gone to her writing lesson, and Eleanor, seeking a volume of English verse, found herself perched upon a ladder, fingertips brushing the higher shelves. She did not hear him enter until his voice spoke from below. "You read Milton before breakfast, Miss Harcourt? Most find him too heavy a companion for so early an hour." Startled, she turned too quickly. A book slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor at his feet. He stooped to retrieve it, his gloved fingers brushing the leather binding. The faintest smile touched his mouth. Paradise Lost. Fitting, perhaps, for those who inhabit houses such as this. She steadied herself upon the ladder, cheeks warming. "I find comfort in its endurance, your grace. Though all falls to ruin, language remains." "An uncommon sentiment," he murmured. "Most prefer consolation to contemplation." He offered the book back to her. For a moment their hands touched. It was the barest contact, yet the air between them altered, charged, inexplicable. She thanked him, retreating into composure. He inclined his head, studying her as though she were a riddle he had not yet decided to solve. That evening, a small parcel appeared upon her writing desk, a slim volume of Keats, newly bound in dark blue leather. Inside the cover was a note, written in a hand both elegant and restrained. For the instruction of Lady Isabella, and perhaps for her governess also. A.C. Eleanor stared at it for a long moment before closing the cover and setting it aside. It was not merely a gift, it was an acknowledgment. Yet she reminded herself that acknowledgment, in houses such as these, was perilous currency. The following week brought both progress and disturbance. Isabella, initially resistant, began to warm under Eleanor's steady patience. The lessons took on laughter. The child's once defiant glances softened into trust. On a bright afternoon, the Duke observed them in the garden, unseen at first. Eleanor knelt beside the child, guiding her small fingers over the pages of a botanical text. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning it the color of chestnuts, and something in the Duke's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, as though he beheld a memory he did not wish to summon. Later, at supper, he spoke to Eleanor directly. "You have succeeded where others failed," he said, his tone unreadable. "Isabella is less combative. I merely treat her as one deserving of sense rather than indulgence," she replied. "Children perceive truth more swiftly than we imagine." His eyes met hers across the table. "And adults?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered quietly, "Adults often spend their lives trying to forget what children know instinctively." A silence lingered between them, charged, thoughtful, fragile. It was broken only by the arrival of the butler, announcing the presence of a visitor, Lady Beatrice Fenwick. Her entrance brought the faint scent of roses and calculation. She was beautiful in a manner too precise to be natural, each gesture deliberate, each smile rehearsed. She greeted the Duke with ease, Eleanor with polite dismissal. During dinner, Lady Beatrice's conversation revolved around London, the season, and the future of Ashbourne's lineage. She spoke of alliances and estates with the fluency of one long accustomed to getting what she wanted. Eleanor, seated quietly beside Isabella, felt invisible, and oddly relieved to be so. But invisibility could not shield her from observation. Lady Beatrice's gaze, though smiling, lingered too long, assessing, weighing. Eleanor sensed in her the sharp intuition of a rival who has detected, even in silence, the tremor of something forbidden. After the guests departed, Eleanor remained in the schoolroom, gathering books left scattered by the child. A faint rustle at the door made her turn. The Duke stood there, his expression grave yet softened by fatigue. "Forgive me," he said. "Lady Beatrice can be persistent." "You owe me no apology, Your Grace." "Perhaps not," he said, stepping closer, "yet I find I wish to make one nonetheless. I had not considered how uncomfortable her visit might prove for you." "I am accustomed to discomfort," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is the most reliable of companions." His gaze lingered. "That is a bleak philosophy, Miss Harcourt. Realistic, I should hope." The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. "I begin to suspect you conceal more steel than silk." She looked away, uncertain how to answer. He regarded her for a moment longer, then inclined his head and withdrew. When the door closed, she felt the room expand around her, the silence pulsing with unspoken words. Days passed, and whispers began to stir among the servants. The Duke, once elusive, now crossed paths with the governess more often than propriety dictated. A walk in the garden, an exchange of books, a conversation by the fire about poetry and war, innocent moments, yet weighted with undercurrents neither could wholly deny. Still, Eleanor guarded herself fiercely. She knew the danger of misinterpretation, of affection mistaken for advantage. Yet every time she heard his voice, low, reflective, edged with melancholy, she felt something within her soften despite reason. One evening, as twilight deepened and rain pressed against the windows, Eleanor found herself once more in the library, reading aloud to Isabella. The Duke lingered in the doorway, unobserved. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying the rhythm of Keats's verse. When she looked up, their eyes met across the lamplight. Neither spoke, yet the silence said everything. Recognition, restraint, and the faint, perilous promise of something beginning. Upstairs, the servants whispered. Downstairs, the candles burned low. And in that fragile hour between dusk and night, a single, forbidden thread began to weave itself into both their hearts, quietly, inexorably, beyond recall. The season turned gently toward summer, and with it, Somerset House seemed to exhale after months of silence. The gardens bloomed in quiet splendor, roses climbing the trellises, the lake glimmering beneath late sunlight, and yet, within its stately walls, something unspoken tightened between two souls who could neither speak nor ignore what bound them. Lady Eleanor Harcourt's days were as disciplined as ever, filled with lessons, order, and duty. Yet beneath her composure lay a constant, perilous awareness. The Duke's gaze upon her when she entered a room, his voice low and even when he addressed her, the way his restraint seemed a form of intimacy. Their meetings were rarely planned, and yet they occurred with unnerving inevitability. A shared corridor, a book lent and returned, an unguarded moment at twilight when his niece, newly fond of her governess, begged that Uncle Alexander join them for supper. What should have been innocent became charged with meaning. Eleanor, ever conscious of propriety, sensed that each conversation deepened a connection neither of them had intended to form. One evening, while Isabella practiced her scales at the pianoforte, Eleanor stood by the window, her thoughts far away. The Duke entered quietly. He paused, watching the gentle movement of her hand as she turned a page of music. "You have brought peace to this house," he said at last. She turned, startled. "Peace, your grace. Before your arrival," he continued, "it was a house of ghosts. Now, even the corridors seem less hollow." His words, so simply spoken, unsettled her more than flattery could have. "It is the child who brings the change," she replied. "She merely required consistency." "Perhaps," he said softly, stepping closer. "But consistency requires compassion. Few possess both." Eleanor looked away, sensing the danger in his tone. "I only do my duty." He studied her for a long moment. "You remind me of someone I once knew in Spain. She tended to the wounded after Badajoz. No rank, no fortune, yet courage that humbled men born to command. You would have liked her. And did she survive?" His gaze grew distant. "She did not." Silence settled between them, heavy yet strangely intimate. Isabella's fingers stumbled over a note, breaking the spell. Eleanor excused herself, but as she passed him, her sleeve brushed his hand. The contact was accidental, fleeting, yet it felt as though the world had shifted infinitesimally closer. In the weeks that followed, gossip began to seep through the household like damp beneath a floorboard. The Duke and the governess, so often seen in quiet conversation, walking the rose path, lingering by the fire after lessons had ended. The servants, cautious of their positions, said little aloud, but Lady Beatrice Fenwick, ever watchful, heard enough from her sources to return uninvited one afternoon, bearing the smile of a woman who has scented scandal. She arrived while the Duke was away inspecting the tenants' accounts. Eleanor greeted her with composure, though inwardly she trembled. Beatrice's politeness was sugar over steel. "My dear Miss Harcourt," she said sweetly, "I do hope you are enjoying Somerset House. I was astonished His Grace entrusted so delicate a household to one so young." "I am grateful for the opportunity," Eleanor replied evenly. Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Indeed. One must be adaptable in your position. Proximity to power is intoxicating, is it not?" Eleanor forced a smile. "I am here for Lady Isabella's education, nothing more." "Oh, but of course." Beatrice's voice dripped disbelief. "And yet, there are those who would say the Duke's attentions have strayed from matters purely paternal." Eleanor's breath caught. "You presume much." Beatrice leaned forward, her tone lowering to something almost kind. "My dear, I do not judge. I merely caution. The world will judge enough for both of us. You are a governess, he a duke. No amount of virtue will protect you from perception." When Beatrice departed, Eleanor sat for a long time in the schoolroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Shame, anger, and something perilously close to heartbreak warred within her. She had done nothing improper, and yet impropriety was precisely what others had begun to imagine. That night she resolved to leave Somerset House. She began to write her resignation, the ink trembling beneath her hand. But when the Duke returned and sought her in the library, her courage faltered. He found her standing by the window, the letter half written upon the desk. "You intend to go," he said quietly, without question. "I must," she whispered. "There are whispers, Your Grace. It would not be right to protect my reputation at the cost of your own?" His tone sharpened, more in pain than anger. "You think I would permit it? I think you must." She turned toward him, her composure fracturing. "You do not understand what it is to be a woman of no fortune, no name. One whisper can ruin a life. I cannot endure it again." He took a step closer. "And what of my life, Miss Harcourt? What of the emptiness you have filled without knowing it? Am I to lose you because the world delights in venom?" His words struck her with both tenderness and terror. "You speak as though—" She stopped herself, breath unsteady. "We are not free to speak of such things." "Then let me be the one who breaks silence," he said, voice low. "When I returned from war, I thought myself beyond redemption. You have proven me wrong. The firelight caught his profile, casting his scar in relief, a mark not of disfigurement but of survival. She felt tears threaten, unbidden. You mistake gratitude for affection, she said softly. Then let me be grateful forever, he murmured. For a heartbeat neither moved. The air between them was charged with the ache of restraint. His hand lifted, hesitated, then fell. Forgive me, he said. You are right. I forget myself. Eleanor drew a trembling breath. There is nothing to forgive. He looked at her then, not as a duke, not as a man of power, but as one who had seen the fragility of his own heart and found it mirrored in another. You are the first peace I have known in years, he said quietly. Her voice was scarcely audible. Peace cannot exist in secrecy. He turned away, as if the truth had struck him physically. Then what am I to do? She folded her hands tightly. Be what you must for your family, your grace, and let me be what I must for my own survival. A long silence followed. At last he said, You mean to leave soon? I do. When? Tomorrow. He nodded once, the gesture stiff with effort. Then I shall not detain you further. He moved toward the door, but paused. Miss Harcourt, he said, without turning, if ever I have given you cause to regret your time here. You have given me reason to remember it, she interrupted gently. He inclined his head and left. That night Eleanor did not sleep. The rain began again, steady and relentless, drumming against the glass. She stood by the window, watching lightning flash over the gardens, the roses bending beneath the storm. Somewhere below she heard footsteps, his, crossing the marble hall. For a fleeting moment she thought he might come to her door. But the sound faded into distance, swallowed by the rain. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of earth and regret. Her valise was packed, her resignation sealed. Yet as she descended the staircase, she found Isabella waiting at the foot of it, tearful, clutching the book of Keats the Duke had once given her. Must you go? The child asked. Eleanor knelt, gathering the girl into her arms. I must, my dear. But remember, kindness is never weakness. It is the only strength that endures. As she spoke, she sensed movement behind her. She turned to see the Duke at the far end of the hall, watching in silence. Neither spoke. The world between them had narrowed to what might have been, and what must now be left unsaid. Eleanor kissed Isabella's brow, rose, and walked past him toward the waiting carriage. The echo of her footsteps lingered long after she was gone, leaving Somerset House colder, emptier, and far quieter than before. The world beyond Somerset House felt distant, muffled, and gray. Eleanor Harcourt's carriage rolled steadily south through the rain, its wheels cutting through puddles that reflected a pale, uncertain dawn. She told herself that she had done what was right, that propriety demanded she sever whatever fragile thread had bound her to the Duke of Ashbourne. Yet the thought brought her no peace. Each mile placed between them seemed instead to press upon her heart like a slow, tightening band. She had imagined freedom would feel lighter. Instead, it felt hollow. By evening, she reached the modest village of Chilsworthy, where a friend of her late father had secured her a temporary position at a small parish school. The work was simple, the pay modest, and the air thick with the scent of hay and ink. It should have been enough. She taught children their letters, mended their books, and smiled when expected. But at night, when the candles had burned low, she would sometimes trace the outline of the blue leather volume of Keats, her one indulgence, still in her possession, and remember his handwriting in the flyleaf. Weeks passed. The countryside unfolded into summer, and rumors of the London season drifted faintly through visiting merchants and letters. The Duke of Ashbourne, she heard, had returned to society. There was talk of a betrothal. Lady Beatrice Fenwick, ever ambitious, was said to be pressing her claim with renewed vigor. The gossip reached Eleanor through the disinterested tone of strangers, yet each word struck deep. She tried to dismiss it. He was a duke, she a governess who had fled his household in disgrace. The world had corrected itself, as worlds always did. In truth, Alexander Cavendish had returned to London not to celebrate but to escape. The house without Eleanor was intolerably silent. Isabella grew restless and withdrawn, her laughter dimmed. Every corridor seemed to echo with absence. He attended dinners and political gatherings because duty demanded it, but his mind wandered. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in silk, pressed him for attention with the confident patience of a woman who believed the outcome already decided. Yet every time her gloved hand brushed his sleeve, he found himself recoiling inwardly, haunted by another presence, one far gentler, infinitely more real. It was during a reception at Devonshire House that Beatrice chose to strike. Surrounded by glittering guests and the persistent murmur of gossip, she drew near him and said sweetly, "I am told your governess has departed with considerable haste. The servants in Mayfair speak of little else. Such an unfortunate situation, though I suppose one must forgive sentiment in men of experience." He turned sharply, his gaze cutting through her poise. "You presume much, Lady Beatrice." She smiled. "Presumption is merely curiosity with courage." "Then may I suggest you exercise yours elsewhere," he said coolly, and left her standing amid the gaslight and music, her expression stiff with fury. The next morning, scandal struck like lightning. A letter, unsigned but clearly written by someone within the ton, began to circulate among the drawing-rooms of London. It hinted at impropriety within Somerset House, at a governess who had bewitched her master and fled before discovery. It was artful enough to avoid accusation, cruel enough to destroy a reputation. By midday, the Duke's name was on every tongue. Alexander read the letter in silence, his expression carved from restraint. "Find the source," he told his steward, "and burn every copy you can find." But whispers, once loosed, could not be contained. Invitations vanished, allies turned distant. What wounded him most was not his own humiliation, but the knowledge that Eleanor, somewhere far from his protection, would bear the harsher weight of that rumor. That night, unable to endure his confinement, he rode out into the storm. The rain lashed across his face, mingling with the taste of salt and fury. By dawn, he had made his decision. The proprieties of rank and station, the unspoken rules that governed every gesture. He would break them all if it meant finding her. He arrived in Chilsworthy 3 days later, exhausted and mud-streaked, his horse nearly spent. The villagers recognized him at once. A duke's presence was impossible to disguise. When he reached the parish school, Eleanor was at the front of the small classroom, chalk in hand, reading aloud to a row of children. Her voice faltered when she saw him in the doorway, tall and drenched, his eyes fixed upon her with quiet determination. "Your Grace," she whispered, setting down the chalk. "You cannot be here." "I can," he replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "And I am." The children stared, wide-eyed. She dismissed them gently, and when the door closed behind the last of them, silence filled the room like held breath. "You must leave," she said softly. "If anyone sees, they already have." He stepped forward, removing his gloves with slow precision. "Your name is being torn apart in London. They say I ruined you. And perhaps I have, but not in the way they mean." She shook her head, pale but resolute. "You owe me no defense. I left to spare us both." "Spare me?" He laughed bitterly. "You have done the opposite. You have left me to a world that no longer holds meaning." Her composure trembled. "You must not speak this way. Your duty is to your title, to your family." "My duty," he interrupted, "has been my prison. I have lived for honor, for name, for all the hollow forms of respect that crumble at a single whisper. Tell me, Eleanor, what good is honor when it demands a man deny the only truth that ever made him feel alive?" She turned away, tears bright in her eyes. "And what of me? Do you imagine I could endure being the ruin of a man's name? I would rather be forgotten than pitied." He crossed the space between them in a single step, his voice fierce yet trembling. "You would rather be forgotten? Then tell me to leave, and I will. But look me in the eyes when you do it." She met his gaze, her lips parted, but no words came. He reached for her hand, not with the entitlement of rank, but with the desperate reverence of one seeking absolution. "I cannot undo what the world will say," he whispered. "But I can choose what I will live for. And I choose you." Her tears fell freely now, her voice breaking. "You cannot mean this. The world will despise you." "Then let it." For a long moment neither spoke. The rain outside softened to a steady patter, the kind that carries more sorrow than fury. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile, but certain. "You would defy everything you are for me?" He took her face gently in his hands. "You are everything I am." The words hung in the air, vast and irrevocable. She closed her eyes, as if the confession itself might undo her. When she opened them, something within her had shifted, no longer denial, but a terrible, luminous acceptance. "Then we are both undone," she said. He smiled faintly. "So be it." The door creaked open. Standing there was the parish vicar, startled by the sight of a duke holding his governess's hand as though she were a queen. Eleanor stepped back instantly, but the moment had already been seen. Within hours the story would spread beyond the village. The Duke of Ashbourne seeking a disgraced governess in the rain. A scandal fit for every drawing-room in England. Yet as Eleanor watched him mount his horse to return and face the storm he had chosen, she felt no fear, only awe. For the first time, the world had turned its gaze upon them not through pity, but through something dangerously close to legend. And though she knew the reckoning had only begun, she felt, deep within her chest, the fragile, blazing certainty that love, once awakened, would not retreat quietly into shame. The scandal struck London like a thunderclap rolling through marble halls. Within days, every salon and supper table echoed with the tale of the Duke who had ridden through the storm for a fallen governess. Letters fluttered between titled homes like restless birds, each embellishing the story a little more, some painting him a reckless romantic, others a man undone by base temptation. The truth, as it always did, sat quietly between cruelty and wonder. At Somerset House, Alexander Cavendish stood before the tall windows, the morning light catching on his weary face. His butler approached with another pile of letters, some from old allies offering thinly veiled advice, others from those who now sought to distance themselves. He ignored them all. His world, so long built on precision and propriety, had come apart thread by thread, and yet he felt no regret. Only an aching impatience. Isabella, his niece, entered quietly. "They say dreadful things about you," she murmured, her small hand twisting at the ribbon on her sleeve. "But I told them they're wrong. I told them you only went because you care for Miss Harcourt." He smiled faintly, kneeling to meet her gaze. "That was brave of you, my dear. But not everyone understands kindness when they see it. Will Miss Harcourt come back?" He hesitated. "If she wishes. But I will not compel her." The girl frowned, thoughtful. "You should. People say love is weak, but I think it makes people do strong things." He kissed her forehead, a shadow of a laugh escaping him. "Then perhaps it is time I stop pretending to be strong and simply act out of love." That afternoon, he requested his carriage prepared for London proper, not for retreat but for confrontation. He would not allow gossip to dictate his truth. As he stepped into his coach, rain began to fall once more, soft as if the heavens themselves were weary of thunder. At Lady Beatrice Fenwick's estate in Mayfair, an afternoon tea was underway. The air was thick with perfume and venom, the laughter brittle. When the Duke's carriage arrived at her gates, a hush fell over the room. Beatrice's fan stilled in her hand. He entered with calm dignity, though his boots were still damp from the road. Every eye followed him as he crossed the room, each whisper pricking like nettles. He bowed slightly to the hostess. "Lady Fenwick." "Your Grace," she replied, her tone sweet with mock concern. "How unexpected. I trust the countryside agrees with you, and your governess." He met her gaze evenly. The countryside agrees with truth, my lady. A quality in which London appears impoverished. A faint murmur rippled among the guests. Beatrice's smile faltered. You seem eager to play the romantic hero, though your station may not survive it. Then let it not, he said simply. A title has meaning only if it serves honor, and honor has no meaning without integrity. Her fan snapped shut. You would destroy your lineage for a woman of no standing? He inclined his head. I would defend her worth against those who mistake cruelty for refinement. The silence that followed was sharp and electric. No one spoke. In that stillness, the legend of Alexander Cavendish, the Duke who defied the ton for love, was born, not through scandal but through conviction. He left before the whispers could find new venom. That evening, the Morning Gazette printed a notice signed in his own hand. His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne, hereby affirms the honor and virtue of Miss Eleanor Harcourt, whose conduct has been above reproach. Any suggestion to the contrary is both false and unworthy of civilized society. It was a declaration that set London aflame. Some called it madness, others gallantry. But beneath the tumult something began to shift. The very women who had once pitied Eleanor began to whisper, half admiringly, of a love that had made even a duke risk ruin. In Chilsworthy, Eleanor read the notice by lamplight, her hands trembling. Her employer, the kindly vicar, looked on with concern. You see, my dear, he has done what no man of his rank has dared. But such defiance will cost him dearly. She folded the paper, pressing it to her heart. Then I must not let him stand alone. The next morning, she took the earliest coach to London. The journey was long, the air thick with dust and anticipation. By the time she reached the city, twilight was spreading like bruised silk across the skyline. She made her way through the familiar streets, once her cage, now her battleground, and at last stood before Somerset House once more. When the butler opened the door, surprise flickered across his face. Miss Harcourt. Please, she whispered. Tell His Grace I have come to return something that belongs to him. Moments later, Alexander appeared at the head of the staircase. For a moment, neither spoke. She looked up at him. The man she had loved in silence, the man who had turned defiance into poetry, and found her courage. You should not have done it, she said softly. The declaration, the scandal. You have given the world your pride. I have given it what I no longer need, he replied, descending the stairs. My pride kept me alive at war. My love makes me live now. Her composure wavered. And what am I to do with a love that will destroy us both? He took her hand. Let it destroy what deserves to die, the fear, the shame, the tyranny of appearance. Let it leave only what is true. For a long moment, they stood in the grand hall, the glow of candelabras softening every edge. Then, with quiet deliberation, she opened her satchel and drew out the blue leather volume of Keats. This, she said, offering it to him, was once yours. He smiled faintly. And now it is ours, she whispered. The gesture, simple as it was, felt like a vow. He took the book, his fingers brushing hers, and the silence that followed was not the silence of restraint, but of peace. Days later, the Duke of Ashbourne withdrew from London society altogether. He sold a portion of his holdings, gave a generous endowment to the parish school in Chilsworthy, and moved quietly to his ancestral estate in Kent. The Ton, deprived of fresh scandal, soon turned its gaze elsewhere. Eleanor became his wife that autumn. The ceremony was small, no fanfare, no orchestra, only the rustle of wind through the chapel garden and the faint hum of a world that could not quite comprehend them. When the vows were spoken, his voice was steady, hers trembling but certain. Later that evening, as twilight draped itself across the manor, they stood on the balcony overlooking the rose gardens. The air smelled faintly of rain and cedar. She leaned against him, her gaze lifted toward the soft silver of the moon. I never believed such happiness could belong to me, she said. He kissed her temple, his voice low. It never belonged to anyone else. Below them, the roses shone like embers in the dusk, each bloom catching the fading light. The world beyond might still whisper, still judge, still measure worth by names and titles. But here, amid the scent of earth and rain, between two hearts that had dared to defy everything, they had made their own kingdom. And so history remembered them not for scandal, nor for ruin, but for courage, the kind that blooms only when love refuses to bow before fear. Long after their time, travelers would pause before a modest inscription carved in stone at Ashbourne Manor. It read, "She taught him to see beauty not in perfection, but in truth. He taught her that dignity is not silence, but courage spoken softly." And though the world had long moved on, those who stood there could almost hear, in the rustle of the roses, the faint echo of a promise kept, a promise that began with a glance and ended in eternity.